Thanks for inviting me and thanks for coming and thanks for getting your beers and sitting quietly and listening. This is an interesting panel, some incredible people. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this country, the Bundjalung people. Pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. This country formed who I am and I care for it and I love it very much. And I'm sure a lot of you do as well. I'd also like to acknowledge mothers. There's a lot of you out there. Thank you. And let me introduce the panel. I've got some notes, just introductions, and I'm free-balling after that. First of all, I'd like to introduce Anna Rose. She's been a climate campaigner for 25 years. Since the age of 14, after experiencing droughts on her extended family farm, she's a co-founder of Groundswell Giving, a platform that raises funding for climate advocacy. And she is here in her capacity as a board director of Farmers for Climate Action. Anna Rose. Dr. Rebecca Huntley. If that isn't a great name, I don't know what is. Rebecca's a social researcher and she's a writer. She's the author of the book, How to Talk About Climate Change in a Way That Makes a Difference. Rebecca. Tom Wolfe is a co-founder, of Revive Northern Rivers. And I'd also like to introduce Ella Noah Bancroft, founder of the Returning Indigenous Corporation and one of the key organisers of the Curry-Mail Flood Relief Hub in Lismore. Thanks, guys. Really, really appreciate you being here. Growing up in this area, obviously, I have a deep connection with the community that exists here, and we're all here because we are part of a community. And what binds us potentially is that we all surf, we all love the ocean, and we all love where we are, and we care. With that, I want to talk straight away to you, Ella, about during the floods in Lismore, Mullum, all the way down Woodburn, Broadwater, Wardell, Corrakai, all of these areas which were tremendously difficult. There was a lot of people in the community that band together and threw themselves at it and wanted to help. And there was something that came out of that. I know these floods were devastating for an enormous amount of people, but I just want to acknowledge the positivity and the hope that I felt in community of people stepping up to actually see the best of people, where it didn't matter, whether you were vaccinated or not, which way you were going to vote, what religion you were, everyone was there. The boundaries were broken down and no one cared. It was just about action and immediate action and helping each other. And that's the best of humanity. And when I experienced that, and I'm grateful for Ella and the team that she worked with at the Curry-Mail, because I just wanted to help. And there was a lot of people that wanted to help. And they facilitated a lot of opportunities for people to be able to get out there and help each other. And I just want to acknowledge that. And I'd like to... Because that's community. That's the strength of what community is. There's something bigger and more powerful at play when we all come together. And I'd love to start with you talking about how that came about, because it was beautiful and it just grew or so organically.
Thank you. I guess when the floods hit, as the whole community did, everyone just jumped really into action. And the Curry-Mail Hub, started very humbly with 4 First Nations women, a marquee and a table. And from day 3, we just started to grow from the help of all of our First Nations core team, but also from the wider community too. And it wasn't planned, like these things never are. It was just people who self-organized. And what I witnessed most about the way that we organized at the Courier Mail was that there was no hierarchy there. You know, we really implemented the old ways of being in the world and what was true to our culture, which was these circular, self-organized beings and teams that just knew what to do, and also we just had deep trust for each other. And one thing we kept saying time and time again is just everyone's doing the best they can with what they've got. And I'd love for our community beyond disasters to be able to be in their heart and recognize everyone's just doing the best they can with what they've got.
Yeah, it was fantastic. And I think, you know, going forward, because we are, you know, these kind of catastrophic weather events are inevitably going to increase. The knowledge and wisdom that you guys have developed through that experience, how are you sharing that knowledge? And is there a desire for people? Have you been approached, for instance, by, you know, local politicians about the approach to strategizing for being prepared for future events in other regional areas that don't necessarily have a community as strong as the community that we have here?
Yeah, I think one thing that we really noticed out there was, you know, given off the back of Black Lives Matter, there's so many people in these communities that want to support Indigenous people, but when a disaster hits, they actually don't have the numbers or know the names for those people. And so if we didn't step in and be a First Nations-led team, there would be people who would be left behind. I think it's a big awakening for our community, especially in the bridging of the more gentrified areas with the more low socioeconomic areas, of how do we keep these relationships alive and going beyond that. And we recognize that one part of doing that is getting First Nation response teams in every state and territory and countries, and by that I mean like nations, so that they can lead that, so that our people aren't left behind, because often they do live on the fringes of certain towns, or they might be living more rural than you even know. And unless you know those people personally, you're not going to know them in a crisis. And so Naomi Moran, who is the general manager of Courier Mail, is spearheading that, and we're working with Tyson Yonkapora at the moment so he can be the brains and help us put together a report to put forward to both state, federal and local governments about why they need to fund First Nation flood relief and fire and just disaster relief teams.
Great. And Tom, you come at this from more of an environmental position with your organisation, Revive the Far Northern Rivers, right? So basically the river systems were at the centre of this in a lot of ways. What's your take on it?
Yeah, so we started because of I think the thing that we've realised is that there's a misconception in this area about how healthy it is. So I think in a place like Byron Bay, where you have a marine park, you look at the ocean and it's like, oh, it's beautiful and it's clear and, you know, it's this lovely place to come. But if you go down to Northwell, Ballina at the moment, it's like a war zone, you know, like gropers washing up on the beach, like it's been brown for the better part of 3 months. I just heard a story yesterday of a surfer getting his eye cut out at Lismore Base because it got infected in the early period. I grew up in Lennox, but I lived in Ballina for all of last year at Northwell, about 200 metres from the beach. And you could go down to the beach in the morning and you could smell the chemicals. You could stand like on the dunes like 100 metres from the ocean and smell the chemicals coming out of the water. And you know, I grew up here, I've surfed for a long time. I spent a lot of my childhood on the river sailing and going out in the boat. And so, me and my girlfriend, Shaya, who's just there in the crowd, we started this together. It actually came during COVID because I had a lot of time on my hands and I'm not very good at sitting still. So I spent the time researching the Richmond River specifically. And probably most of you don't know this, but the Richmond River is the second least healthy river in New South Wales. It's the second most polluted, essentially. Mostly due to sediment, chemicals from places like macadamia farms, and then just like long-term grazing and 200 years of deforestation, without sounding too bleak. It's still a beautiful river. I still love it with all my heart, but that's the reality that we live in.
So the focus of your organisation is really about awareness and education.
Yeah, so essentially it's about changing the narrative, I guess.
You guys. Where's your mama?
Respect the elders, remember? Not that I'm that much older than you. It's basically about raising awareness, but it's about being optimistic. Because I think we have plenty of reason to be optimistic. I think that I've been really lucky, and I don't know if Shay would probably feel the same. We kind of have become a magnet for good news. Not all of the news that we get are we able to share because I just don't have enough time in the day. But when you create an organisation like this, probably the best thing about it is that you just get all of this good news about, all of these regen projects and all of these amazing people in the community who are doing all this great stuff, but you don't read about them on the news, or you don't hear about these people, and they're out there every day doing all this stuff. And so ideally one day I would like for it to be a full-time storytelling venture of all of this amazing stuff that's going on. But it's only a year old, so it's got a bit of a way to go.
I totally feel the same about working on these issues and hearing the good stuff.
Yeah.
Because we all read the headlines about, well, we don't have to read the headlines because we live in the Northern Rivers, we can just see it. But we know that climate change is getting worse, extreme weather events are getting worse, inequality is getting worse, everything in Australia is not heading in the direction that we would want it to go in so many areas. But I've been a climate campaigner since I was a little kid, and that was because of drought, not floods, but that's the impacts that I saw on my family's farms. And now that I have worked on it for so long, the people that I meet that are most despairing are the people that aren't involved. Because when you are involved, you see not only that we're making progress, but that it is bringing together people that you wouldn't traditionally, Surfers for Climate is such a great example. 20 years ago, when climate change started to be an issue on the public consciousness, you wouldn't think that that would necessarily bring together a group of surfers holding an event like this, bringing a community together. But it has, and it's some of the groups that Rebecca and I work with, like Parents for Climate, Farmers for Climate Action, the Jewish Climate Network, surfers, AFL players. There's so many. Yes, you go.
And Anna at the moment has got me training hairdressers to talk to their clients about.
We just did 2 trainings,
which is very effective.
Because they've got them for 45 minutes with scissors.
Actually, a lot longer for people like me.
Oh yeah, if you have your hair's different
the
to
more
mine.
hair, the more time to convert people to climate change. But just to Anna's point, as somebody who has come relatively late to the climate change movement,
You should tell your story.
well, I shouldn't. Look, I was one of those. I was somebody who knew climate change was a thing. I read about it in the newspaper. It was something that I knew that I thought government should do more about. But it was very clear that it wasn't at the centre of my worldview. A lot of other things were. And then one morning I woke up and maybe I wasn't hungover, maybe I'd had not enough coffee, I don't know what it was. I woke up and I saw the climate strikers, and they were not unlike, they were the faces of my daughter's generation, and for a really profound moment I thought, they are asking me to do something. Because they can't vote, they don't have money, all they have is the power to leave school and do these very fantastic signs. And at that very moment, I changed my life and made all of my professional and personal time committed to climate. Now, if you had said to me 6 or 7 years ago that that's what would happen, I would be incredibly surprised. And one of the things that I feared the most, I knew that I was on a trajectory to do this work and work with people like Anna and other people, is I thought I'd spend a lot of my time really depressed. I did stock up in a whole lot of, Nurofen, gin, over-the-counter drugs. I thought that's what's going to get me through this. But actually, every day is talking, just being here and being with people like you, people like Anna, people who care about it. And I meet everybody from financial advisors, strangely enough, to hairdressers, to lots and lots of people who are doing things. And actually, I think I'd be far more depressed if I wasn't engaged.
Speaking about engagement, as far as we have an election looming, and it seems to be that how long ago was the flood? It seems like
28th of February.
Exactly, but it seems like I can't even see it coming up in the campaigning for the election. It's sort of disappeared off the map. So, as far as government addressing these issues and the depoliticisation of the word climate change, I mean, you see, we talked about it earlier today, Tom. Like you see people turn away as soon as you use the expression climate change. You even mention it, or climate action. People just disappear and fall away. So how do we, and I feel like in a lot of ways, this is the Tony Abbott issue, isn't it? He's responsible for a lot, but how do we take the politics out of the issue? Because the politics, no matter which way you vote, whatever, it's going to affect all of us eventually, and we've already seen that here in Lismore and in Byron and around this area. How do we diminish the political nature of that?
I could talk about that. I guess we don't have long to turn things around on climate, and we've already seen what's happening to this community with just over a 1 degree global average temperature rise. Now we are on track for over 1.5, probably 2 degrees. So just imagine what that's going to look like. And that means, I guess, without getting too technical about climate science, but the scientists that I work with, it's really clear we've got maybe 7 or 8 years before we hit these tipping points, after which it is the point of no return in our Earth systems. It kind of unleashes these things that get out of control. So we have to think about the next 7 to 8 years and what we need to build in our politics to both reduce emissions as quickly as possible, stop expanding the gas industry, stop expanding the coal industry, but also build resilience in our communities so that we can deal with the climate impacts that are already locked in. Now that's what I call reality. And then you have political reality, which is there's a big gap. So I spend time in Parliament House, or at least I did before it was locked down with COVID, and for every one of me, climate campaigner, I would see in the hallways dozens of lobbyists from the fossil fuel industry. And I would go into their offices and I would see, I'd have a little brochure, we'd be with farmers talking about the reality of droughts, and then we'd see all these materials that were left from coal and gas companies. So we're up against a lot, but we do have time to turn things around. And coming to your question, I don't believe we can turn it around until we get to a bipartisan approach on climate, until we get people who vote for the coalition, people who vote for Labor, people who vote Green, people who vote Independent. We need climate to be a priority issue for all of those groups.
Absolutely. So I have 2 things to add to that. So Anna and I spend a lot of time with politicians, and one of the things they'll say to you off the record is they'll say, look, the kinds of people that turn up to a craft brewery in Byron care about climate, but that's not the majority of people. The majority of people say they care about it, but when it comes to how they spend their money, what choices they make, and what choices they make about voting, they don't care. So what it means for you is that you need to think about how you use your vote and express to people why you vote the way you do, because it's driven by climate. And more importantly, when we all stumble into the night, think about 6 or 7 people that that you've never had a conversation with climate change about. They're about to vote in an election where there is a significant group of people who are disengaged, not interested in the 2 major parties. talk to them about why you are voting the way you are and that climate is urgent. Because until the major parties largely don't talk about climate because they think they will be penalised for talking about it. We have to make sure that they are penalised for not talking about it. Now, the good news is this. The good news is, in the last 3 years, more and more Australians across this country are Googling what is climate change, which is great. I mean, they are Googling, is Amber Heard crazy, or what happened with Johnny Depp more often, but I will take any progress that I can get. We are seeing teal independence do extremely well, but more importantly, what we're seeing in the research I do is people have looked at the fires, they have looked at the floods, and they are starting to realise that climate change isn't some abstract thing that will hurt polar bears. They see that it's something that's affecting our country and the people we love now, and we just have to drive that home. This is the most important, and I am nearly 50, it is the most important federal election I have ever seen since I was 18 on climate, on the future of this country, and everybody can talk about climate with people and we can get this done.
What are the actual numbers on that, Rebecca?
Sorry, numbers?
In numbers, because it's. I remember you mentioned these numbers to me once before, and I was quite surprised, and it was quite optimistic.
Yeah, so I would say about 91% of the community are either sold on climate or sold on the solutions about climate. Only 9% of the community are Matt Canavan and his mates. And no one wants to go to that party. It's not fun. We are the majority. The issue is not is climate change is happening, is what can we do about it, right? So the people that you know that you perhaps have never talked about climate change with are probably more receptive to the conversation than you imagine. And if you tell a story about why it's important, and it really doesn't matter whether you're voting Greens, Labor, Teal Independent, or a Conservative that actually cares about climate, but you need to be able to tell them, I'm still voting for you because I think you're a voice for climate within a party that needs to shift. It kind of doesn't matter where you sit politically, you just need to communicate why you're doing what you're doing and talk to your friends and family about it as well. So we are the majority in many ways, but we have to make that majority felt politically. So like I said, the major parties feel that they are going to pay a penalty for ignoring climate change as part of the national conversation.
This might be a little controversial, but I would say don't let politicians have the power. If the floods have shown us anything, it's that we actually have the power. And if my mother's taught me anything, it's that grassroots is the only way you're going to see change. And unfortunately, we're up against a system that is built like this. It's built for this reason, actually. But we have a lot of power and we can mobilise very quickly. And what I would suggest is if you know organisations, grassroots organisations in this area or beyond, get behind them as much as possible and try and invite your friends who are not in Byron in different areas to get behind these grassroots organisations too, because we really can change politics, not with politicians.
I also think that, I think the challenges now that the major parties are facing with independents that are, economically moderate but also very staunch about climate is a real threat to these two major parties. And it's evident that the two major parties aren't engaging the disengaged voter. You mentioned to me earlier today, Tom, that like a lot of people your age are like, don't want to know about it. I'm not interested in politics. It's too much.
We were talking about the relationship between that and privilege.
Exactly.
And the way you described privilege I really liked. It was, what was it again?
Well, the privilege as the devil itself, the devil incarnate version of privilege is being able to be cloistered in a cotton wool world where you don't, where nothing uncomfortable ever touches you.
That's right. It was about being uncomfortable, and I think a lot of good things come from being uncomfortable. Yes. Probably the best things, actually, I would argue. I felt really uncomfortable about the state of the river that I grew up on, and that led me or us to do something about it, because it got to the point where I was like, how in the 2020, it was 2020, how in 2020 are we in this place where the most important life force in the area, I mean, it's the Northern Rivers, it's called the Northern Rivers, the most important life force in our area is so degraded that we've just turned our back on it. Like, Ballina not so much, but if you go to Lismore, like, Lismore faces away from the river. All the buildings face away. It's like, over the course of 200 years, we've just done this because we don't want to look at it anymore. And I think that's really devastating. And on the flip side, I've spent I don't know how many hours on the rivers between Ballina all the way up into Gormangar Creek. I spent a lot of last year paddling past dead cows and dead sheep with a bunch of primary school and high school kids for the living school. But there's still a lot of beauty on those rivers. That's the thing that I learn, is they can be degraded and they can be pretty bloody unhealthy, to be honest. But you can be paddling down this like eroded, full of camphor laurel riverbank, and then you just get to this stretch of 100 metres and it's all native rainforest, and you're like, where did that come from? And there's all these just amazing little pockets. Like, you obviously have one where you live, but a friend of mine lives in Eltham, just not far from the pub, and they have like literally just a square of old rainforest. And I always wonder, like, why did someone just leave that little bit of rainforest behind? And I'm so glad that they did, because that's how we learn to get back what we lost. And
They left it to inspire you, Tom. They left it to inspire you.
Say again?
They left it to inspire you.
Yeah, well, that constantly inspires me, so it works. But yeah, I think, we are dealing with a legacy of 200 years of essentially destruction and exploitation. And I think, I genuinely believe we've already started turning the corner. I think there's a lot of negativity out there, but I think if you look at the attitudes of Australians 50 years ago compared to now, I think we've come a long way. And I think looking at like Ella and Naomi and Amarina and all the women running, and actually just a quick shout out, the entire flood recovery almost entirely was run by women. Women leaders. The Koori Mail.
Very well supported by our men,
yeah,
for sure.
Totally. But the
for
leadership
sure.
positions were women. It was like the men going up to the women being like, what do we do now? And they'd be like, do this, do
But
that,
they
do
brought
this.
the muscle.
Yeah, totally. No, it's
We need that.
You're not completely redundant.
No, not completely.
yet.
But it was
got
just a really
plans, though.
beautiful thing to
Be
watch.
careful.
And, and just like acknowledge and see that was the case. And just, when you compare that to who's running the country, it's like chalk and cheese. Like, you couldn't have more of a, polarity between the two. So I think that was, that very thing that a First Nations run organisation was leading a recovery. That is an achievement in itself, and has shown how far we've come, I think.
Well, haven't we got so much to learn from First Nations cultures about resilience?
Very much so.
And haven't we got... one of the really interesting things from the social research that I was doing after the fires is even people that didn't connect the Black Summer fires to climate change were saying in our groups, well, shouldn't we be listening to Indigenous cultures about how to manage our environment to deal with fires? They've been doing this for generations. Shouldn't we put that at the centre of how governments manage? And that is probably one of the only good things about the fires. So I think there's so much more work to do, but there is so much that we can learn.
True. Fantastic. About that uncomfortable thing, because I do believe that really positive things do come out of uncomfortable situations, and being able to sit in that uncomfortable space, which is something that we're going to have to get more and more used to, and I think it's a really good thing. We're a community here, and as Rebecca pretty much pointed out, there's no one really in this room that's a problem. I mean, we're all pretty much vying to help with the solution. But it's extending our community out in a way where we have those uncomfortable conversations with people that we know and that we care about. And Rebecca was pointing out maybe 6 people, whatever. I'm not going to put a number on it, but we probably all know people that are skeptical or don't want to have the conversation. How do we approach those conversations? I mean, I'm just going to put the question to the panel. I'd love to hear all of your thoughts on it, but how do we approach those uncomfortable conversations? I know Anna's really good at this. Smiling assassin. Don't let her, yeah, she's ruthless. But how do we approach those uncomfortable conversations? Because that's how we grow what we believe in. That's how we grow our community, and that's the strength of it, is the community again.
Honestly, it depends on, well, first of all, what kind of relationship do you have with them in the beginning? I mean, don't come up to people in a bus shelter that you don't know and yell at them. I mean, I've learnt that the hard way. But I think that, look, I think the best thing that I've worked out is understand the opportunities and the hooks to start to have the conversation. And this is where your community has, at the moment, some national attention. I don't come from this area, but I do lots of focus groups with people all over Australia, and they see what you've been through. They know that the floods have hit people who are still trying to recover from the fires. And so your voice has an incredibly important role nationally. So you've already got the permission and, in fact, the need to have a conversation with people about exactly what climate change is doing to your community. And you've got an enormous amount to be proud of in terms of resilience, but there's only so much that a community can take and still not lose things. So I think about your relationship with the person, what you have in common. I often talk to people who are, Anna and our profession really is to talk to people and work out what are the things that they value. Some of the hardest conversations are to have with the people that are closest to you, because you kind of feel sometimes that they're judging you, or you're judging them for not caring about an issue. They know they should, but they don't kind of find a way.
Shame
is difficult.
Shame
is difficult. But the other thing I'm armed with is I'm armed with a million fantastic things that are happening across this nation that people can do. And I think about, what does that person like? Are they really into finance, or do they really care about animals, or do they really love gardening? And I think about how to say, well, you know, climate change is going to affect this thing that you love. Have you thought about this? Start small, stay open-minded, and think about how you can start from a position of mutual interest. But Anna, you're fearless in these conversations, but yeah.
We could just take all the climate deniers to the Richmond River and ask them to drink from it.
And film put it on TikTok.
Honestly, if you can't drink from your river systems, there's something really wrong with the planet, that you can't drink from your river systems.
Yeah. I think mine would actually be, I don't know if it sort of semi-answers the question, but I think the thing that really amazed us during the floods was that everyone came to the realisation that if they did what they were really good at, that would benefit everyone. So people that were graphic designers were making political things to disseminate, and people who are good at driving boats went to Lismore and pulled people out of roofs, and people who are good at whatever, like the list goes on. And I think it's the same with the climate. It's like, you have a skill, whatever that skill is, it's useful in some way. And if you can find a way to use your talent or your profession or anything that you do in a way that's going to start a conversation or continue a conversation, that's the way that I see is the best. That's what worked during the floods.
Yeah, that is so spot on. Yeah. Because no one wants to grapple with a problem that they, A, can't see a solution to, and B, can't see themselves as part of that solution. And, you know, 10 years ago now, 2011, I'm bad at maths, everyone knows this, I went on a journey for 4 weeks with Tony Abbott's mentor, Nick Minchin. He was the finance minister, he just retired, a kind of elder in the Liberal Party. He had rejected climate science his whole life, and I took him around the world for 4 weeks. It was filmed for the ABC to try and help him grapple with climate, and he introduced me to people that he thought would change my mind and vice versa. But, you know, at the end of our journey, I said to him, if you were me, and you were young, I was young back then, if you were a young person and you cared about climate and you're worried about your future, what would you do? And really invited him to step into my shoes, just as I had tried to approach that whole journey with putting myself in his shoes and being respectful and listening. And he said to me, well, I would talk about renewable energy and all the benefits of moving away from coal. We're going to run out of it anyway, and it's bad for your health anyway. And, I guess he started giving me communications advice. Talk about renewables, I think that's the best way. And that came on the back of him earlier. I'd introduced him to someone who shared his worldview, who was a conservative British politician. And Nick had gone into that journey saying climate change wasn't happening, and if it was, it had nothing to do with humans. And then by the time he met Zach, this UK MP, he said, okay, climate change is happening, and humans have caused part of it. So he moved a little bit, and then right at the end I said to him, well, Nick, if we're going to make progress on this issue, we actually need people like you who have spent your life in public policy, and we're coming at it from a different angle, but we can't only have one half of the population trying to think of solutions to this. We won't get there because it requires systemic change in our energy system, in agriculture, in our built environment, in transport, in the way communities, are supported. So I'm glad that you're engaging with this. And he said to me, well, that's really refreshing, Anna, because everyone always just calls me evil and says I'm the devil and doesn't want to talk to me. And that kind of really changed my activism, because I, started when I was 14. I used to blockade McDonald's. People threw chips at me, and I was a forest campaigner, and I was a very kind of traditional activist. And then that journey with Nick, I never liked the chips anyway. It made me realise we have to reach out, we have to listen, we have to work together, we have to cross political divides, or we won't get there in the time we have left to turn this around.
And I think that's exactly right. And again, remember, 91% of the population, you can have some kind of conversation about climate.
Yeah, that's great. Guys, we're gonna wrap this up. I just want to thank you all for your respective listening. I want to thank this fantastic panel, Ella, Tom, Rebecca, and Anna. If I can just leave you with this very loose anecdote that I don't even think is actually an anecdote, but I was just thinking about, I read this book many years ago called The 100th Monkey. I don't know if anyone knows that story. It's kind of a story about consciousness, where there was one Pacific island where they taught the monkeys to wash the coconut before they ate it, right? And it got to the 100th monkey, and all the islands in the region, the coconuts were being washed before the monkeys ate it, right? And I believe that there's that kind of power in community and people, consciousness of people coming together. So thank you, and have the tougher conversations. We've got 2 weeks before the federal election. Woo, woo. Thank you.